Hello friends, hope all of you are doing well. In today's session we are going to discuss a novel by George Eliot, Middlemarch. Basically Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is a novel by the English author Mary Ann Evans. So you heard it right guys. Basically this novel is written by a woman who actually wrote as George Eliot. Okay, that was her pen name. It first appeared in 8 installments in 1871 and 1872, and it was set in a fictional town called Middlemarch. Basically, this fictional town was a Midland town in 1829 to 1832. So that's basically the setup is a fictional town called Middlemarch, and the time period is set in 1829 to 1832, and it follows distinct intersecting stories with many characters. Mary Ann Evans, known by her pen name George Eliot, was an English novelist, poet, journalist, translator, and one of the leading writers of the Victorian era. So, why did she prefer choosing a male name rather than her name on her compositions? The idea behind this is quite fascinating because during those times, the female authors were not taken very seriously. So, in order to get her work acknowledged, she chose a pen name called George Eliot for her all compositions. The major highlights of today's session will be, first of all, we'll be discussing about the various characters present in the novel, the major as well as the minor characters to a great extent. Secondly, we'll be discussing about the plot summary in a very discreet and sorted manner, because if you just read the novel, you will find the novel a little bit complicated and little bit difficult to comprehend and understand. So I'll try to make it as simple as possible in today's session. And thirdly, we'll be talking about the various themes related to this novel, which is very important from the examination perspective. And talking about exams, in the fourth, and which is the last but not the least, we'll also be talking and discussing about a question which came in February term and examination 2021 from this novel. All right, so let us start with the characters in this novel. The major character in this novel and the protagonist of this novel is Dorothea Brooke. You can just see the character map in the screen. We'll again come to this character map after we have completed the plot summary of this novel, and then you'll be easily able to figure out what is the relationship and how all the characters are interconnected with each other. All right, as for now, since the beginning of the novel, just try to remember the names of the major and the minor characters. All right, the other major characters are Edward Casaubon, Will Ladislaw, Tertius Liget, Rosamond Vincy Liget. And two minor characters that I'll be talking very predominantly in the novel are Nicholas Bulstrode and Camden Fairbrother. The novel starts with the introduction of the main character and the protagonist of the novel, that is Dorothea Brooke, who is shown as a very intelligent and ambitious woman. She, along with her sister Celia, who are both orphans, live with their unmarried uncle Mr. Brooke in Tipton Grange. It's been shown in the novel that a person called Sir James, who is very fond of Dorothea, is also courting her, and once Mr. James, along with his friend Sir Edward Casaubon, a 45-year-old bachelor and a theological scholar, visits them for a dinner. Casaubon has spent multiple decades working on ambitious work of religious history, the key of all mythologies. So Dorothea has been passionately at work on architectural designs for cottages for the tenant farm workers. So in the dinner party, what she decides is that if she gets married to Reverend Edward Casaubon, who's basically a middle-aged man, then that will help her to fulfill her ambitions and her dreams, and in the process she can also be a part of his ambitious work of religious history, the key to all mythologies. Sir James approves of Dorothea's plans, but Casaubon is totally uninterested in it. Casaubon sends an awkward marriage proposal to Dorothea, who is totally excited about it. Mr. Brooke, their family friend, Mrs. Cadwallader, are both hesitant about the marriage but eventually accepts it. Sir James, on the other hand, is horrified at the news that Dorothea has decided Reverend Edward Casaubon for her life partner, but decides to be friends with Dorothea. During a premarital visit of the Brookes to Casaubon's house, they are introduced to Will Ladislaw, who happens to be the second cousin of Kasabban. On the other hand, a different character, a young doctor named Tertius Liget, comes to Middlemarch to carry out his practice in the service of the people of Middlemarch. Liget is enchanted by the beauty of Rosamond Vincy and falls for her. Rosamond, on the other hand, is fascinated by the idea that her relationship with Liget will help her social stature grow and give her financial stability. Rosamond's brother Fred is a lazy, irresponsible, and arrogant young man who believes he will inherit a fortune from his ailing uncle, Mr. Featherstone. Fred, in this notion, borrows money. Fred is also in love with a girl, Mary Garth. Bulstrode, a wealthy banker and a suspicious figure in Middlemarch, invests a lot of money for the new hospital in Middlemarch and wants Dr. Liget to be the director of the hospital. On the other hand, it's shown that Dorothea is in Rome with Casaubon for their honeymoon, and she is quite unhappy there, primarily because Casaubon doesn't let her work with him in his scholarly work. Will Ladislaw visits Dorothea in Casaubon's absence, while Casaubon is busy working for his scholarly work in the Vatican Library, and tells her Casaubon's work is doomed for failure as Casaubon can't read German. Casaubon, when finds out about the visit of Will Ladislaw in his absence, gets infuriated and wants to ban Dorothea and Will from meeting each other, but eventually doesn't go through it. Fred remains troubled by his death and at the same time fails his university exam, which makes him feel worse. He attempts to sell his lame horse but fails. Fred develops a fever and is diagnosed with typhoid by Dr. Liget. Mrs. Vincy joyfully declares that Liget has saved Fred's life. Dorothea, after returning from Rome, gets the news that her sister Celia is engaged with Sir James. In case if you remember, Sir James was the same person who was courting Dorothea in the beginning of the novel. After returning from honeymoon, Casaubon gets ill and is diagnosed with a heart condition. Liget suggests Casaubon that his condition will be fatal if he doesn't stop working too much. At the same time, Liget realizes he loves Rosamond and proposes her. As Mr. Featherstone's death draws near, his relatives crowd around the house, hoping to ensure their inheritance. He is annoyed and tells them that he has already made his will. Shortly afterward, Featherstone dies. At the reading of Featherstone's will, it is revealed that all his money and land will go to his illegitimate son, Joshua Rigg, whom no one in Middlemarch has ever seen before. So here we see, guys, that what is happening, that Fred was totally dependent on this fact that he will be inheriting a good fortune from Mr. Featherstone's property, but eventually doesn't ends up getting nothing. On the other hand, Mr. Brooke buys the local newspaper, The Pioneer, and employs Will Ladislaw as editor-in-chief. Casaubon is discontent with the news as he suspects his wife Dorothea to have an affair with Will Ladislaw. Meanwhile, Mr. Brooks stands in elections amidst criticism. Obviously, in Middlemarch, it is understood that Mr. Brooke is not liked by many people, and obviously he was getting a lot of criticism, okay, for his hypocrisy. Fred has returned from university where he was finally able to pass his exam and obtain his degree. Joshua Rigg's stepfather, John Raffles, arrive in Middlemarch. Now this John Raffles is a very important character and you have to remember this name from the examination perspective. He arrives in Middlemarch seeking money from Joshua Rigg. Rigg bitterly dismisses him due to the fact that Raffles is an alcoholic who used to beat Rigg. Meanwhile, Liget receives resistance from the people of Middlemarch who were not comfortable with reforms. Will and Liget becomes friends. It's also shown in the novel that Dorothea is quite sympathetic with Liget as she understands his ambitions were for the well-being for the people of Middlemarch. On the other hand, the people of Middlemarch were not very much happy with the reforms and changes. They were not in acceptance with that. On the other hand, Casaubon dies prematurely, leaving a will which states that if Dorothea marries Will Ladislaw, she will receive nothing from his property. Celia reveals the fact of the will to Dorothea, who, for the first time, considers the possibility that she has feelings for Will Ladislaw. Mr. Brooke is not received well by the people of Middlemarch during his election campaign. Mary announces that she won't marry Fred if he enters the church. Now guys, we have seen in the beginning of novel that Fred is the brother, the lazy brother actually, lazy and arrogant brother of Rosamond, and who is in love with his childhood friend Mary Garth. Raffles starts blackmailing Bulstrode about his past. Rosamond, on the other hand, has a miscarriage after a horseback riding when Lidget told her not to. She and Lidget are deeply in debt, forcing Lidget to sell their silverware, which infuriates Rosamond. Rosamond tells Will about Casaubon's legal will forbidding him from marrying Dorothea. So here we understand that basically Lidget and Rosamond are not in a happy social life. Their marriage is going under a lot of turmoil and they are not happy in their marriage. In the meanwhile, Raffles' presence continues to trouble Bulstrode. Raffles was aware that how Bulstrode married a rich widow and inherited her property, which legally belongs to her daughter Sarah, Will Ladislaw's mother. Can you see the connection here? Yes. So basically, Will Ladislaw's mother Sarah was disappeared for a brief time in the novel, and Bulstrode was given the responsibility by his wife to find her. And what he does, he employs Raffle and tells him that Sarah is nowhere to be found, so that he could inherit all the property of the widow whom he has married. Bulstrode in present tries to give the inheritance to Will as a form of atonement, but Will refuses to take it. Will realizes that he is in love with Dorothea and plans to leave Middlemarch. Lidget in the meantime in debt and asks Bulstrode for money, but he refuses and suggests him to file for bankruptcy and also asks him to step down from running the new hospital. Raffles in the meantime dies under the care of Lidget and Bulstrode, but before he died he shared the secret of Bulstrode with a local horse dealer Bambridge. The gossip spreads as a wildfire in Middlemarch, forcing Bulstrode and Lidget to leave Middlemarch, as they were taught to hatch a plan to kill Raffles to hide the secret. Dorothea has a small misunderstanding that Will is in love with Rosamond, but Rosamond tells Dorothea that Will is actually in love with Dorothea. Will and Dorothea finally confesses their love for each other, and Dorothea is ready to forsake the fortune in order to marry Will. Bulstrode leaves Middlemarch, agreeing to give his house to Fred. In the finale, the narrator explains what happens to each of the main characters after the end of the main narrative. Fred and Mary get married and have a happy, prosperous life together. Rosamond and Lidget's marriage remains unhappy, and when Lidget dies at 50, he considers himself a failure. Dorothea and Will live in London, where Will has a successful political career and Dorothea is a wife and a mother. Now, since we have gone through the plot summary of The Middlemarch, a study of provincial life by George Eliot, let's go back again in the character map so that we can understand the characters from the novel's summary's perspective. So here we see the main character and the protagonist of the novel is Dorothea Brooke, who is an ardent idealist who finally settles for wifehood. Here we can see the mapping done very nicely, that Dorothea is married to Edward Casaubon, a failed author and a failed husband. And eventually she is also connected to Will Ladislaw, who happens to be the second cousin of Edward Casaubon. Will Ladislaw is a rebel and a non-conformist, finds a career and a soulmate. So we can see that at the end of the novel, Dorothea and Will Ladislaw are married to each other and they are very happy. So here again we see one more failed character, that is Tertius Liget. An exceptional doctor fails to meet his potential. So here Tertius Liget, even though he was a very good person who wanted to bring reforms in Middlemarch, he received a lot of resistance and eventually he was in a lot of debt and he had to leave Middlemarch. So his spouse, his wife, was Rosamond Vincy Liget, who was a shallow social climber and a narcissist. We also see here Nicholas Bulstrode, who was a religious hypocrite and a wealthy banker. So both Tertius Liget and Nicholas Bulstrode were partners in philanthropy. And Nicholas Bulstrode also happens to be the uncle of Rosamond Vincy Liget. Here we see one more character, that is Camden Fairbrother, who is a beloved clergyman. And Fairbrother and Bulstrode are adversaries. On the other hand, Fairbrother is in friendship with Tertius Liget. One more mapping that is not shown here is the friendship between Will and Liget. They are also friends with each other. And the other characters that I have missed, I really apologize for that, because I know that I have missed one couple of few more characters here, like Fred, who happens to be their lazy and arrogant brother of Rosamond Vincy Liget. So I hope that you have understood the total summary along with the characters, because it's very important to remember the characters from examination perspective. So as promised, let's discuss the major themes of Middlemarch, a study of provincial life. The first major theme here is women and gender. We can see in the novel that George Eliot has tried to refine the characters of both the genders, male and female, in a very well manner, and also that the stereotype about the woman, that women are not capable of doing ambitious projects, is clearly portrayed here, and the frustration and the sarcasm is been noticed in the novel. Because we see in the beginning of the novel that Dorothya was a very ambitious woman who wanted to do something for the farm workers. She had a beautiful architectural design for the cottages for the farm workers, but eventually she couldn't get it through. The second major theme of Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is ambition and disappointment. So when we say this theme, two major characters comes to our mind. Basically, Dorothea Brooke, who was a very ambitious woman and wanted to bring reforms in the life of farm workers by her architectural design of for cottages, but eventually has to settle for marriage, and she was met with disappointment. The same goes for Dr. Tertius Liget, who was a very ambitious and a very energetic doctor who arrives in Middlemarch to bring reforms in the medical world, but eventually he is also met with disappointment. So the third theme of Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is community and class. Here we see how the characters like Rosamond Vincy Liget plans to marry Dr. Tertius Liget just to gain a social stature advantage and to have a financial stability. We also see people like Bulstrode, how he marries a widow, a rich widow, in order to get her inheritance. So community and class plays a very vital role during that period, and it's clearly reflected in the novel that how many characters try to attain the class by unfair means as well, and how the class is given a superior priority in the novel. The fourth theme in Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is progress and reform. Now, nothing much can be said about the progress factor, the progress theme in Middlemarch, as we can see that a lot of resistance are shown by the people of Middlemarch when it comes to reforms and progress. So as we can see in case of Dorothea Brooke, who happens to have a very good design, architectural design for building cottages for the farm workers, not coming to life. And we also see that how Dr. Liget is faced with disappointment. But again, we also see that in case of Bulstrode, who happens to make a new hospital in Middlemarch, and eventually that also fails. And there are a lot of reforms where a lot of characters try to bring a lot of reforms, primarily in the case of Dr. Liget, but all of them are faced with disappointments in the end. The next theme of Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is money and greed. So here we can compare two characters to understand this theme properly. primarily Rosamund Vincy, who wants to have a financial stability. She wants to have a financial security so that she can live a stable life. That's why she plans to marry Tertius Ligет. And in case of greed, we have characters like Raffles, who wants to have some easy money, and we also have Bulstrode, who marries a widow, a rich widow, just to acquire the and just to have the inheritance of her property. Where we also see that how greed leads to devastating and selfish acts, like in case of Bulstrode, who refuses and like who is reluctant to find the lost daughter of the widow Sarah, eventually turning out to be Will Ladislaw's mother, just to have the money in his name. So moving to the final segment of today's session, that is discussing the question that came in February term and examination 2021 from Middlemarch, a study of provincial life. So the irony to this question is that it is the same question that we have just discussed a couple of minutes back. So the question goes something like this: what do you think are the main themes of Middlemarch? Discuss with reference to the characters in the novel. So here we see that this is the same question that we have just discussed, the Middlemarch themes, where I have primarily mentioned the themes as woman and gender, ambition and disappointment, community and class, progress and reform, money and greed. But again, if you just read the question, that they are asking your perspective, your opinion, that what do you think are the main themes of Middlemarch, you can add or subtract a couple of themes, but yes, of course, not to miss the main points by doing so. And if you have any other major themes in your mind, then please comment in the comment section. I would definitely like to know about it. And yes, if you just want to cross check your answers, like if the answer is up to the mark, then you can do reach me out through my WhatsApp number and the mail that is given in the description. So this is the video, guys. I hope you have understood the entire plot summary of Middlemarch and also liked my new initiative to explain a particular topic from examination perspective. Primarily in this session we have discussed four categories. We have four categories. The first of all, we had the character map in order to give you a glimpse of the characters that are present in the novel. Then I went ahead and to explain the plot summary of the novel, and then I discussed the major themes of the novel. Finally, moving on to the latest term and examination question paper discussion, the question that came in the February term and examination 2021. I hope you have liked this approach of mine. In case if you have any other doubts regarding this topic or any other topic, do feel free to comment below in the comment section. Till then, God bless you and thank you all.